Buenas. Hoy vamos a hablar del presente continuo en español. Today we're going to talk about the present continuous in Spanish. Although this is an example of a compound tense, it is relatively simple. It is worth noting that there is only one real reason that we utilize this tense, and that reason is to talk about actions that are ongoing or in progress, okay? Anything that is happening at the moment of speaking. This is what makes this tense different from the present simple, right? If I say, él trabaja en una oficina, he works in an office, that does not mean that he is literally working at the moment. He could be at home, he could be at school, whatever, right? But it could also mean that he's working there as I speak, right? Because the present simple can also be used to express actions that are happening at the moment of speaking. But this is more common, right? So although the present simple is used that way, this is the better option when we are talking about something that is happening right now, right? As I said earlier, it's a compound tense, which means that it comprises two parts. The auxiliary verb of estar, which will be in the present tense, followed by the gerund of the main verb. So let's look at estar. As we know, it's irregular. Yo estoy, tú estás, él, ella, usted está, nosotros, nosotras estamos, vosotros, vosotras, for all my Spaniards, estáis, and ellos, ellas, ustedes están. Okay? So this is the auxiliary verb estar. Now let's look at the gerund. How do we form the gerund of the main verb? Now, a gerund refers to the continuous form. In English, this will be represented by the suffix ing that you will see at the end of a verb. For example, doing, right? The ing represents the gerund. In Spanish, of course, it's a bit different. So to form the gerund, the infinitive of the verb, which should be ar, ir, or er, is dropped, and either ando or yendo is added to the verb. If we have ar verbs become ando. We add ando once we have dropped the ar, right? And if we have ir and er verbs, those will take yendo, right? So these are the endings that we add depending on the type of verb we're talking about, right? So for example, mirar, which means to look at or to watch. We remove the infinitive ar, we have mir, and then we add ando, mirando, right? Similarly, vivir, which means to live, we eliminate the ir, we have bib, and then because it's an ir verb, we add iendo, and consequently we have viviendo, okay? So those are just some examples. So we know how to form it. The present tense of estar followed by the gerund of the main verb. If it's an ar verb, we remove the ar and we add ando. And if it's an er or an ir verb, we remove those endings and we add iendo. Okay? Now these are just examples of the present continuous, right? Because we have already done the context, right? Estoy bebiendo agua. That comes from the verb beber, to drink, and drinking water. Beber is an er verb. Therefore, we drop the er ending and we add iendo. And also, we are using the first person singular. So we use estoy, right? We have an example of a question. ¿Estás escribiendo la carta? That comes from the verb escribir, to write. Estás, because we are talking to the second person singular. Escribiendo. IR verb, remove the IR and we add yendo, right? Are you writing the letter? And finally, we have an example of a reflexive verb. And if you don't know what a reflexive verb is, it is a verb in which the subject and object are the same. So someone is performing the action on him or herself, right? Nos estamos cepillando los dientes. This comes from the verb cepillarse, which means to brush, right? We are brushing our teeth. So if we have a reflexive verb, we put the reflexive pronoun at the start. Then of course we conjugate estar to agree with that subject, followed by the gerund of the verb, right? So in this context, cepillarse is like we take off the reflexive pronoun, which in this case would be se, because it's in the infinitive, right? And we conjugate it to agree with the subject. So we're talking about the first person plural, nosotros. So we put nos before, and estar obviously agrees with nosotros, estamos. And then we are left with cepillar, and since it's an AR verb, we remove the AR and we add ando, okay? So it's relatively simple. But, of course, like most tenses, there are exceptions to the rules. So let's get to these various exceptions. So we make our way over to the irregular verbs, otherwise known as los verbos irregulares, okay? So we have categorized them into two groups based on their irregularity. So the first irregularity is going to be those verbs that require the addition of y, which in Spanish is y or y. Ir, which means to go, becomes yendo. Leer, to read, that becomes leyendo. Incluir, to include, that becomes incluyendo. Caer, to fall, cayendo. Traer, to bring, trayendo. Creer, to believe, creyendo. Oír, to hear, oyendo. Okay? And these are just some examples which utilize the irregular gerunds. Okay? So, estoy leyendo la revista. I am reading the magazine. Leyendo. Estamos trayéndole un pastel. Estamos trayéndole un pastel. We are bringing a cake for her. Now, le is an ambiguous pronoun because it can refer to él, ella, or usted. But let's just assume based on context that it is already understood that we're talking about a woman. Okay? So this is why I did not add the indirect object. I just used the indirect object pronoun. And as you see, I attached it to the infinitive, right? But once I attach that to the, not to the infinitive, to the gerund. Once I attach it to the gerund, we have to place a tilde on the third vowel from the end, right? So 1, 2, 3, accent. I could also say, le estamos trayendo un pastel. I could put the direct object at the indirect object pronoun at the start, all right? So this is the second group of irregular verbs. Decir, diciendo. Decir means to say or to tell. Pedir means to request or to ask for. Pidiendo. Reír, to laugh. Riendo. Sentir, to feel. Sintiendo. Dormir, to sleep. Durmiendo. Mentir, to lie. Mintiendo. Poder, this means to be able to. Pudiendo. Seguir, to follow or to continue. Siguiendo. Venir, to come. Viniendo. Morir, to die. Muriendo. Vestir, to dress. Vistiendo. Servir, to serve. Sirviendo. Preferir, to prefer. Prefiriendo. A little difficult, that one. Requerir, to require. Requiriendo. Repetir, to repeat. Repitiendo. Okay, so these are the second irregular group, and of course this is just an example or two examples in which I utilized an irregular form, right? So la mujer está pidiendo ayuda. The woman is asking for help. Pedir means to ask for or request. Te estamos diciendo la verdad. We are telling you the truth. Decir, of course. Now, it is worth noting that if you have a verb that carries these verbs within it, in other words, these verbs form part of that verb, then the same structure applies, okay? For example, predecir, okay? Which means to predict. So, prediciendo, predicting. For example, we have bendecir is another example, which means to bless. Bendiciendo, blessing, right? Let's use another example before we close. We have perseguir, to pursue. Persiguiendo. You see, seguir is contained within perseguir, so that seguir part will follow the same rules as seguir. Hence, we have persiguiendo. Okay? ¿Vale? Es fácil, ¿sí? Bueno. Hemos completado la lección. Muchas gracias por ver. Espero que ustedes hayan disfrutado de este video y que hayan aprendido mucho. Chao.